Hey, que Pasa Calexico? Welcome back to the podcast. Today we're here at Adrian Cordova Park once again. Today I have a guest that reached out to me, and when he emailed me, he gave me like a kind of like a little overview of what he wanted to talk about, and some of the things that some of the places he mentioned was, something that kind of like brought back the nostalgia of growing up here in Calexico. My guest today is Jonathan Angulo. He's a teacher, a researcher, he has a laundry list of things he is, and he's writing a book, and he's doing research for this book, and the things that he mentioned that, kind of like, brought me back to growing up was Price Center, Las Palmas, Santo Thomas, all these places that, we used to shop growing up whenever we wanted to, get some clothes to go to a party or whatnot. But before we get into, your research and your book and all this, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? I know you mentioned that you grew up in El Centro. You've been, growing up in the Valley all your life. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what interested you in these topics?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me for the interview. I'm most appreciative of you spending your time talking about this research interest that I have. Yeah, so my name is Jonathan Angulo. I'm currently a lecturer at San Diego State University and a postdoctoral fellow at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas. And I was born and raised in El Centro, California. And, I went to, McKinley, Kennedy, Southwest High School. And I think it was in my high school, experience that I wanted to become a history teacher. I took history courses with Coach or Mr. Swearingen.
Okay.
And I always thought his kind of discussions about history were very, insightful. And I just found the way that he taught history to be really interesting. So in high school, I kind of always had the idea that I wanted to be a history teacher. And then, I went to IVC for 2 years, got my associates in history. And then I went to San Diego State University where I got my bachelor's. And in IVC and at San Diego State University, I took courses with Professor Bradford Wright at IVC. He's a historian of like comic books and stuff like that. He really kind of showed me the idea of how to do research and stuff like that. And then when I moved over to San Diego State University, I took most of my classes with Professor Carlos Herrera. And Dr. Herrera, was very instrumental in kind of telling me about, hey, there's a lot of history about the Imperial Valley in Mexicali that's very kind of under-researched. And if you're interested in pursuing that avenue, you can go to graduate school and you can acquire a master's or a PhD in history. So if you're interested, I would encourage you to do that. So then after that, I took a year off and I was a substitute teacher for Centro Union High School District. And I was also an avid tutor, after school, or not, during school hours. So during that leap year, I just kind of went to and studied graduate programs and stuff like that. So then I went to Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas, to pursue my master's and then my PhD. And the reason I went to that university is because they have the Clements Center for Southwest Studies, and the Clements Center for Southwest Studies focuses on the history of the U.S. and Mexico borderlands. And in particular, what my research focuses on is how immigration policies between the United States and Mexico and the restrictions within them influence borderland communities to participate in the informal economy. And even though they're shut out of the original parts of the economy, they create economic opportunities by creating formidable businesses and stuff like that. So I look at it from the 20th century. So I start in the early 1900s and I end in the 2000s. And what I'm really doing my research on right now, right, because my book covers, a long trajectory of time, is looking at how after the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, which was the law that put an actual restriction on Mexican immigration and immigration from Latin America in particular, really, reduce the avenues of actual immigration into the United States between Mexico and Latin America. So that's why we have a pretty big, like, undocumented immigration problem, right? Because of that law in 1965, which hasn't been overhauled since the 1990s. So anyways, I always saw that correlation between, like, undocumented immigrants, economic policy. And I really noticed it growing up here in the region by shopping at Las Palmas, Santo Thomas, and Price Center. How people were like, yeah, I came here into the United States and I didn't really know, like, where exactly I could work at. And I could find employment opportunities working with these swap meets. And after working in the swap meets as help or just regular workers, I was able to create my own stall. And through the avenues that I created with this economic process, like, I acquired a social security number, and then I was able to legalize my status. And then, growing up in the region, like, there's examples of people who have sold goods at Las Palmas, Santo Thomas, or Price Center who have created, like, businesses outside of the swap meets. So pretty much, like, the last part of my book looks at that economic development. And right now I'm, like, studying more, like the Estrada family creating Las Palmas, how Santo Thomas came about, and also, like, Price Center, right? Because Las Palmas and Santo Thomas were what are called, like, open air markets, and Price Centers are more enclosed. So anyways, that's a little bit about me, like what my research focuses and looks at. And yeah, pretty much that's it.
Do you think that, you went to Texas to go study? Did you get a chance to visit, border towns in that area, and if you did, like, what was because I remember talking to somebody that was from a border town once. I interviewed her because she used to do the voiceover work for, like, Walmart and TJ Maxx. Like, she would be the girl that talks,
Yeah.
And we actually ended up talking more about growing up in a border town and how similar, where she lived and the things that they do to what we did here in Calexico or in the Imperial Valley. What was your experiences with, seeing and visiting some of these border towns over there?
Yeah, so I have not been to the RGV, the Rio Grande Valley or South Texas, but I have met a lot of people who live in Dallas, who grew up in RGV or South Texas. And also, as well, I've done a lot of research about the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas. Like, for example, one of my colleagues who graduated from Southern Methodist University, his name is George Diaz, and he wrote a book called Border Contraband. And it's a book about what he calls, like, the moral economy of contraband. And he talks about how, during the early 1900s, Mexican and Mexican Americans along, like, Laredo and Nuevo Laredo decided about, like, what was morally acceptable to smuggle across the U.S.-Mexico border. So things like, I'm trying to remember, like guns were not morally acceptable to smuggle across Laredo and Nuevo Laredo. So, like, people would tell on other individuals who, like, would smuggle guns, right? But it was something like for example, like, here, one of my other colleagues who grew up in El Paso and Juarez, he has a podcast called El Podcast, and he talks about, like, bologna smuggling. Like, how people would buy, like, bologna from, like, food or something like that, and smuggle it, like, across El Paso and Juarez. They didn't do that in Laredo during the early 1900s, but I'm talking about, like, that's an example of, like, a commodity or a merchandise that people would deem, like, morally acceptable to sell, right? But I've also, met other colleagues who have lived in South Texas, and whenever we meet, we always talk about the border culture, right, and the border experience. Like, here, we call them, like, tianguis. In other places, they call them, like, la pulga. In other places, they call them, like, flea markets. In other places, they call them, like, bazaars and open air markets. So there's, like, a lot of synonyms for them, right?
Yeah.
So we would talk about, like, there's, like, a whole bunch of, like, tianguis, There's a whole bunch of, like, pulgas and stuff like that, like, in South Texas.
Sobre Ruedas is another.
What was that?
Sobre Ruedas, have you ever heard of that one?
I haven't.
it's well, they have them in Mexicali, and I think it's more of kind of like a traveling one.
Okay.
So like one day they'll be in one colonia, and then another day they'll move to another colonia. So that's why they call it sobre ruedas, because they're on wheels, so they can move from colonia to colonia. And that's because I know, because there was one in where I grew up in, and I didn't grow up in Mexicali, but my parents have a house, so I would go like on the weekends, and I think Saturday, Sunday, the sobre ruedas was in our area, so that's how I about the sobre ruedas and how they got their name. But yeah, it's another term that they use in Mexico or Mexicali. Sobre ruedas.
Okay, that's cool. And this is like new?
No, it's been forever. Yeah,
that's crazy. That's something that I need to explore. Because I've also been thinking about like Los Tianguis in Mexicali, and I think about like El Caballito, right?
Yeah.
El Caballito being like the most prominent one, like growing up. Like right now, it's kind of like the same state as Las Palmas, Santo Thomas. So anyways, that's good that you bring that up, because I think that's also important, right? Because one of the things that I'm thinking about is like, how do these tianguis and swap meets change in the 21st century in competition with like Amazon, Walmart, and all that stuff.
or Alibaba, all those websites. Yeah.
What's that thing called? The Shein? Right?
Shein,
yeah. How do they compete with that, right?
Because that's something that I was thinking of when you mentioned all these places that are pretty much like gone now, like Price Center. I mean, Santo Thomas is a different story, but especially like downtowns, like some smaller towns. I think it has to do a lot with all these websites where people, they can get things cheaper than they probably do, locally or at a store. So I mean, they have to compete with all these, and I mean, if you think about it, like these little shops like at a Price Center or like downtown, they were probably like the Shein or the Temu from back in the days, because you could go in there and like find like little knickknacks that you go to Temu and you see, this is pretty cool, and you order like 100 of them for some reason or another, and that, before you could find them in these little shops.
Yes, that's kind of part of one of the sub arguments that I'm making, that because this has not only happened in the Imperial Mexicali Valley, it happened all over, as we mentioned previously. It happened in South Texas. It also happens in Dallas. Dallas is like 8 hours away from South Texas. But as I mentioned previously, in Dallas, they have the name for like a bazaar. So bazaar is kind of like the Price Center. It's all like indoor. And you can go in there, in like the barrios in Dallas. And you can go in there, you can buy like your cobija, you can buy like your America, like, your
jersey.
Like your jerseys and stuff like that. So it happens there, and it also happens, like, it's not exclusively like reserved for like Latino communities. Like you also see it like in Minneapolis, like in Minnesota. They have like, I don't know what they're called, bazaars, but you also have indoor markets where people are kind of like selling that stuff. So one of the sub arguments that I'm making is that if we want to understand like why Walmart, Amazon, Shein, Temu, what is it called?
Temu, I don't know. Yeah. People have different ways of pronouncing that.
Yeah,
I've heard Temu.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's like GIF or GIF.
Yeah.
I don't know
which one is it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we want to understand like why these kinds of places really took off. We need to understand the role that the informal economy and swap meets had, right? Because, and even everything that, like, for example, Ross and Marshalls, right? Everything that Ross and Marshalls does is kind of what people at the swap meets would do, right? We're talking about like Miércoles de Palmas, right? What the vendors would do from Miércoles de Palmas is they would go to like LA, San Diego, and they would go to retailers and buy all of the clearance item in bulk. And they would come back to Las Palmas on Wednesdays, and people would wake up really early at 4 o'clock in the morning, and they'd go
get the best. Be the first one.
Exactly. Yeah. So, when we look at the history of like these swap meets, it helps us understand like why like Ross and Marshalls and like Temu and Shein and Walmart and Amazon were really successful, because these corporations just pretty took those ideas and they ran with it, and they just created them into corporations pretty much. So I think that's why like it's kind of, you always have like the local demand about like what the community is like deeming, right? I think that's why it's so hard for Las Palmas to be competitive right now, because there's just stuff that you can get at much cheaper prices online instead of like going and waking up early, going over there and stuff like that. But regardless, like I told you previously, like my brother-in-law, like he goes religiously, like he goes like every Wednesday, because there is some stuff that you can find there that people just don't know about. Like he really likes like music equipment, so he goes there and he buys like pretty like official like guitars, like guitar pedals, pianos and stuff like that, and also too like herramientas, like he's like, yeah, I can get like shit that's like really expensive at Harbor Freight, and vendors from Las Palmas like are like, oh yeah, like I'll give you like this set of tools for like $5. So he always finds like good stuff. So anyways, like even though it's kind of like hard to compete, there's still like a local demand for them, and that's why they're still alive pretty much.
And I feel like sometimes like there's always a bunch of people that, because I watch a lot of YouTube videos where like people go out to flea markets and buy old toys, and that thrill of going and finding like this rare toy and for really cheap, and then being able to flip it and buy it and sell it on eBay or whatnot. I didn't say whatnot as a page, because there's that whatnot page. Have you heard?
I don't know. I never heard of
it's
it.
like it's an app or like a website where it's like kind of like Twitch mixed with eBay, because you're doing it
really?
live.
Okay.
So it's like people are bidding live, and you have the toy and like you're selling, and you're like, so you see people bidding on it. So, but I said whatnot, but I wasn't talking about the page. But yeah, like that thrill of finding that gem of, oh, I'm gonna make so much money on it. But just in general, like people like to go be there and touch it and see it, and sometimes like stories you hear from other vendors, like it's there's always going to be that group of people that want to do that, and kind of like, I don't know if it's going to be enough to keep these kind of these swap meets and these flea markets open, but I think there's always enough people to kind of keep them alive for a while.
Yeah. No, I agree. And even though you're seeing the decline of them in the United States, they're still pretty prevalent in places like Mexico, Central and Latin America, and even in Asia. And this is something that I've been learning, right, about like the history and stuff like that. Like the reason that in Mexican society you have unions for street vendors and swap meet vendors is because of these markets in Mexico City. So like in Mexico City during the age, don't quote me on this because I'm still like doing the research on it, but during the age of the Porfiriato, right, which is like the Porfirio Diaz presidency / military dictatorship from like the 1870s to the 1910s, since Porfirio Diaz and like the Mexican leaders in society wanted to create a more like urban Mexico City, you always had like street vendors and swap meet vendors like selling stuff in Mexico City. And as they started like redeveloping like certain neighborhoods in Mexico City, some of these neighborhoods was the lifeblood of like vendors, right, in these areas. And starting in the Porfiriato, like Mexico City government started like creating laws that like protected these vendors. And like after the Mexican Revolution, obviously the Mexican Revolution like has a right for workers to create like unions. So that's why they're protected like by the institutions of Mexican society. And also too, like not even Mexico City, but also Puebla. Like Puebla also had a really big role in, protecting street vendors and swap meet vendors. And that's what I'm talking about, right? That one of the reasons that they're still pretty prevalent in Mexican society and other parts of Latin America is because like they're protected by, either federal, state, or local law. And they have a lot more rights compared to like in the United States. And, we live in a border town, so we know that like, people from Mexicali, they come to Ross and Marshalls and like they buy stuff in bulk and they take it back and they ask for like gift receipts, right? To pay the customs. And so yeah, they're still like really prevalent, like in Mexico
Mhm.
and parts of Latin America. And that's something that is really like interesting, right? When you compare it between like the United States and Mexico, you can like really see the differences and how they're still struggling, but they're still pretty very much alive.
Yeah.
And even too, like in places like I mentioned, like in Dallas, but also like in Los Angeles. Like last August, I was visiting, and there was like, if we picture of like Las Palmas and Santo Thomas, and it's like its heyday, like it was still happening in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
So like you still had like a shitload of like cars going into park and like buying stuff like that. So maybe they're like struggling here, but in other areas in the United States and part of the globe, like they're still thriving.
Yeah, because my son visited my cousin, and he was over there for like a week, and he went to a swap meet in India,
Yeah.
and he said it was popping. It was like
Yeah.
a bunch of stuff that
Uh-huh.
he even bought a couple of things there. But I think it's more of a since I think over there, like when there's a small community, or there might be like a big community of Hispanics or Mexicans, but when you do a swap meet and it's more of those that might not be able to go to a big store like a Ross or whatever, and they go there and they shop a little bit cheaper.
Yeah.
They sometimes people just go like for the food, because it's like a fair, you know. Sometimes
Right.
the food vendors are really popular at these places. So even here, you know, I remember at Santo Thomas they had the hot dog cart.
Yeah.
And in Las Palmas they had the little food court area, and even in Price Center they had the little
The Chinese food.
Yeah, Chinese food.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, a lot of times, you know, people go out to these places, and it's sometimes like a family event. You know, they take the whole family, and you know, they buy little knickknacks here and there. So I think it's more of a, maybe if they change to do it at night and make it like a night swap meet, maybe things which people will be more willing to go out there. But yeah, I mean, because I even in San Diego, I know that they still have that swap meet, and is it Kobe's?
Yeah, I think my brother-in-law goes there all the time too.
So I think, you know, yeah, they're still like alive, but I don't know why here in Calexico or in the Valley it's more.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, that's what I'm finding out. that's what I'm researching, right? Because right now I'm kind of in the stage of how did the Calexico City Council approve the swap meet?
Have you already asked around, or you're barely in?
That's what I'm at right now. So you know how there's the what is it called? It's like when you ask for official documents from like the federal government.
Oh, the CEQA? No.
The Freedom of Information Act, FOIA.
FOIA.
Yeah, FOIA. So there's a similar law for California. It's like the equivalent to the Freedom of Information Act for the state of California. So right now I'm in conversations with the like Calexico City Council officials who work for the city of Calexico to get like those documentations, right? And in the newspaper research that I've done with the Calexico Chronicle, and also, you know, there's like this piece about the founders of Las Palmas, the Estrada family, Raul and Alice Estrada. And it's really interesting because, you know, that newspaper article talks about like how it started, right? Like Raul and Alice Estrada, and Raul in particular was like a migrant farm worker. So he traveled across California, and I believe he was from, again, don't quote me, because like, you know, I don't want to give like the wrong information out, but I think he was from Purandiro, Michoacan. And he came to the United States and worked as a migratory farm worker. And then here in Calexico, he was leasing like the property off of Ali Avenue. And it had like palm trees. Like there's like this really cool picture. And it has like palm trees. And he was leasing the land, and like I don't know how exactly it happened, but over time there's people who are like, hey, can I like post up here and just like sell my clothes and I'll pay you some money, right? And Raul was like, yeah, sure, you know, like post up and just give me like some like money for you to be able to do this. And then over time, more like word spread around because of the palm trees, right? The palm trees could shade them from like the really hot heat here in the valley. And then his wife Alice like helped them kind of like manage, like the rents and stuff like that. And Alice started selling food too, like at Las Palmas. And then I think in 1972 or 1973, from like leasing that farm and the profits that he got from, again, like these informal vendors who are technically like underneath the table, right? He was able to purchase the property off of Ollie Avenue. And then right now what I'm trying to understand is like, how did he work with the city council in order to formalize it? And in like my dissertation, I only like talk about it for like a page or two, but I talk about how Willie Moreno, who like owned, like a fabric enterprise or something like that here in Calexico, he was kind of like not necessarily against, but kind of like ambiguous and kind of in confrontation about Las Palmas because it was his competitors. So at Las Palmas, you could find like whatever Willie Moreno was selling, and it would put it into competition with himself, right? So there was a lot of like debates and like the city council meetings about, should these things be like authorized, should it not be authorized? And then, later on, obviously it grew, right? Like Las Palmas and Santo Thomas grew. And they really like did really, really well in like the late 1970s and the 1980s. And that really had to do with what was happening in the United States and Mexico, right? You had like the energy crisis during the Carter administration, Mexico helping out the United States during the energy crisis by providing affordable petroleum, but at the same time acquiring a lot of debt. And then in 1982, like Mexico embraces like neoliberalism by disinvesting in social programs, and people like resorted more to the informal economy. So the reason that like in the 1980s, like a lot of these swap meets, not only in Calexico, like really thrived, but also in other places across the United States, because like people were stretching their dollar, or people were stretching their peso, and they were like, hey, what can I do? I can buy these affordable merchandise at these swap meets to kind of like broaden or reduce the impact, right? So that's what I'm trying to like research right now, like how did that conversation like play out between Las Palmas, Santo Thomas Price Center, and the Calexico City Council to like approve it, and like what exactly is happening? How did these vendors that are inside like work with the families and the owners? Like, were they like approved by the city council, or like how did that work? That's pretty much where I'm at right now.
Okay. Hey guys, sorry for the interruption, but I want to take this time to thank my sponsors. I really want to thank my longtime sponsors, my friend Camilo Garcia, Eddie Lopez from Cultivating Ideas, and my friend Jake. And finally, this year's new sponsor, the Valley's champ, Gil Rebollar. Thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. I truly appreciate your sponsorship. And if you want to become a sponsor, you can go to anchor.fm/Que Pasa Calexico. Hit the support button in the middle of the page, and you can sponsor the podcast for 99 cents to up to $10 a month. Your sponsorship helps the podcast look and sound better, and it also helps reach out more people by doing paid promotions. And I'll leave a link in the description of today's show so you can easily find the website where you can sponsor the podcast. And now back to the show. So, but you barely started these conversations. You haven't really. It's not like you haven't really found out much yet.
Yeah. So right now, like I mentioned previously, like I finished my dissertation in 2023. So that chapter, which is like, their dissertation, like in academic like talks, when somebody publishes their dissertation, depending on the field, you turn your dissertation into a book. So your dissertation is the rough draft of your book. So like the 6th chapter of my book is focusing on, like everything that I'm talking about, right? Like swap meets, but also talking about like the immigration laws that are happening in the background and the economic things that are happening right now. So when I was doing my research, it's like you have to finish your dissertation. So like to put it, like it's pretty much like really crappy like research, right? Because you're just like writing, like you're reading everything, you're writing, and you just have like a draft of your chapter. That way, when you submit it to your committee, they're like, this is what's good, this is bad, this is what you need to revise. So I only really spent like about maybe like 3 months like researching this, right?
3 months.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it's like, well, 3 months.
Yeah.
It's It's a long time, but
yeah. So I spent like 3 months. So most of the information that I got was from like the Calexico Chronicle. The Calexico Chronicle is digitized to the University of California, Riverside. So you can go into the Calexico Chronicle and just like type anything in. So I was like kind of like researching that. And then I was just also going into Google and putting like Las Palmas, blah, 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 blah. And that's how I came into like the, I think it's like the Desert Review, who has like an article about like the Estrada family. And then also too, after I published my dissertation, I'm a part-time lecturer at San Jose University. And one of the assignments for one of my classes is an oral history assignment. And oral history is pretty much like an interview, but you pretty much just let the person speak without interrupting them. And it's to complement the sources that I'm talking about, right? I looked at newspaper articles, and I'm potentially looking at city council documents, and the oral histories are supplementing what is not discussed in those sources, right? So it's to provide a more complex and complete understanding of the history that happened. So in the class that I teach at SCSU, the students need to interview an acquaintance, a family member, or a coworker that they know that experienced like a significant historical event in the Imperial Valley or Mexicali. So right now I'm in the process of continuing these oral histories, right? About like creating those conversations with the community about like, hey, do you know somebody within the Estrada family? Do you know somebody who has sold goods there that can talk about like the history, right? So my students don't necessarily just touch on that. It's really open up to them. Like if they want to interview somebody about like the experience of COVID-19, the Bracero program, like the death of Rufino Contreras, there's like a lot of things that they can talk about. So that's pretty much where I'm at right now, right? Because interviewing people, but also trying to get the city council documents to look at and write this like history. But also, like as we talked about previously, like these are things that we grew up with that we really don't know the history of, right?
Yeah.
And people in the community like really cherish them and value them. And like what I want to do is like make these interviews like accessible, so the community can like create like events like commemorating like the history of like the Imperial Valley, but also like Mexicali.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much where I'm at right now.
And it's funny because you mentioned Willie Moreno, and honestly, I've never really thought about who he was, or when I went to junior high, that's kind of like the first time when they barely opened Willie Moreno.
Yeah.
Back in like 95, 94. And ever since, I have never really asked or even questioned like who was Willie Moreno.
Yeah.
But now that you mention him, it's funny that I came here when I was 8, and Willie Moreno has been like a school that
it's everywhere.
And I'm like what the heck was Willie Moreno until you mentioned it, like wow.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know he was I guess like a business owner.
Yeah, he was so again, I'm doing more research about it, but from what I wrote in my dissertation, he was a Calexico City Council member and he was a business owner.
Oh, okay.
More to be like discussed soon, or to be unveiled soon.
Yeah, and hopefully I'm glad you reached out, because hopefully I kind of know a couple people that I might get you in touch with that know a lot about Calexico, and hopefully people that are listening or watching can if they know somebody or want to talk about it, maybe they can reach out to you and help you out with your research. But yeah, it's fun. It's fun, learning all these things that to us are always in the back of our mind, because we grew up with these things, but we never really questioned like how it started, who started it. I've been here. I've never heard about the Estradas.
Yeah.
And it's fun to learn all these things of somebody that's doing research on it. So what do you expect to, or what would, now that you're asking how this came about, what do you expect is going to be the answer of how it became kind of like, I guess, legal or not?
Yeah.
Because in small towns, there's often decisions made by a city council or that not necessarily are done in a in a bad way, like say approving like a Las Palmas. Maybe they saw it as an opportunity for economic growth here in Calexico, that they were willing to say like, you know what, we'll approve it even though there's really no guidelines or laws or how it should be ran. Do you expect it to be something similar where like it's like, we don't know how to run this, but we're gonna approve it either way?
Yeah, I think I'll give the answer that usually is what we see in like U.S. history, like Latino history, like Black history, is that it's going to be a very complicated picture. And I also think like also too, right, because I've lived in Dallas for like 7 or 8 years now. And like, this is not something that's only like exclusive to like small towns and rural communities, but even in Dallas, there's like a lot like of like debate about like redevelopment and blah blah blah. So every time there's like an economic question, like in all like city councils, whether it's like suburban, rural, or like or urban, there's always like these like hastily like made decisions, but also as well like these repercussions they have for history that are like really complicated. And I think that's what I'm gonna find. I mean, I think, and this is something I talked about in my dissertation, like the economic contributions of like Las Palmas to and Santo Thomas to Calexico was like huge. Like in my dissertation, I talk about how there's like this debate with the Calexico City Council about approving the size, the expansion, because you had, let's say, 100 stalls where vendors could sell. And I think Las Palmas or Santo Tomas was like expanding to like 200 or 500. And they brought like a third-party consultant to assess what were the economic contributions of the swap meets. And they assessed that it was like $20 million like of like economic contribution of like the swap meets. So, the Estrada family and the other people who own these swap meets are obviously like paying taxes on property taxes on it. So it's like really, a pretty significant chunk of like revenue that could go to the city council and just to administer like policies and stuff like that. So the issue was about residents in Calexico were like, no, like we don't want to support, not all residents, right? Because it ended up happening. They ended up approving the expansion of it. But some, and it was really interesting because like some Calexico residents were like, well, all they sell is like stuff that doesn't work and stuff that's illegal, right? Like they sell like counterfeited CDs, they sell like pirateria and blah, 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 right? And, the police officers are going in there and confiscating stuff. So it's like this place for like, for pretty much like, how do I put it? For criminal activity, right? They were like associating like the swap meets with criminal activity. And this, because again, not only like Hispanics and Latinos sold stuff at these places. Like in my research, I talked about there was a South Korean who sold stuff there. There was a person from Israel who sold stuff in there. So it was like very like, multi-ethnic and multiracial. And there was this vendor who was like, well, I support, who sold stuff there. He was like, I support like the expansion of these swap meets because if the Calexico City Council gets in the way of my business, like they're not supporting my right given in the U.S. Constitution that supports my ability to promote economic prosperity or whatever. So it's like really interesting, right? Because it's kind of like, it's like this guy's like using like these like arguments about the U.S. Constitution to support like the expansion of the swap meets, even though like people are like associating it with criminality. So it's like really interesting, right? So it's like, again, going back to like your question about what do you expect to find? It's like these really complex historical examples of like, people like making like these really complicated things that happen, right? In these discussions about authorization of these swap meets and like all of this other information that not only happens here, but in other areas as well. So I think that's pretty much like what I'm going to find. Right? It's something that's not like black or white. It's something that's like gray.
Yeah.
Much. Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's especially now with, that we've lived through the Santo Thomas, decision, yeah, you kind of like figure that some of these decisions made back in the days were, and like I said, not in a bad way, not the right ones, but because they really didn't know how to handle it or how to go about it, but they saw the benefits of having something like this, be part of Calexico or, the community. But yeah, it's really, I hope that you get the information that you need.
Yeah.
Is there, well, I mean, we're almost 45 minutes more or less. Anything that I didn't ask you that you would like to, mention or talk about?
I think we covered most of it. I think, again, the community knows best, right? So, if you know somebody who knows about this history, I'm a historian. I'm also an oral historian. So I do like interviews of individuals. I've had like years of experience like doing that. So yeah, if you can reach out to me, and also too, like something that I think that is really important and that we need to see more of in the Imperial Valley, but also Mexicali, is like highlighting the importance of the history of this region. And that's what I talk about in my classes. Like there's a lot of local history beyond some of the history that we know of, like Barbara Worth, Charles Rockwood, and like some of the quote unquote like founders of the Imperial Valley. But there's like a lot of rich history that's like not that we always hear growing up.
Yeah.
But that's not really like highlighted, I'm trying to think of some stuff, right, that I talk about like in my class. Like in my class, I talk about, before Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers movement, one of the organizers, his name is Ernesto Galarza. And Ernesto Galarza was like tasked by the American Federation Labor Union to oversee like the unionization of farm workers in the Imperial Valley. And before there was the United Farm Workers, there was the National Farm Labor Union. And the creation of the United Farm Workers is really molded by what was happening in California, but also as well what was happening like in the Imperial Valley, right? There was like this really important strike in 1951 about Ernesto Galarza trying to like to create a unionization here for farm workers. And, that ended up like fizzling out, right? So there's like Ernesto Galarza, something that's just really important to the Valley, but you never like hear about it. Also as well, like the United Farm Workers, like United Farm Workers are like really present here in the Valley. And one of the reasons that they started to like slowly like wither away from the Valley was because of the death of Rufino Contreras, who's somebody that we always hear about, talking about Calexico. But it's never something that's really like talked about, like in terms of like national or not national, but local dialogues about like the history of like Rufino Contreras. El Hoyo, right, where La Gran Plaza, like, where they're creating where they expanded the U.S.-Mexico port of entry, like that, like in the Hoyo was like where Cesar Chavez would like come down to and speak to like United Farm Workers and people who are trying to like unionize. So again, like there's a lot of like these like interesting histories that I think that as we move forward, like from the 2020s, like that are starting to like make more discussions about local history. Because again, like the Imperial Valley is a really rich history, and people think it's like, well, nothing really important ever happens here, right?
We just grow crops.
Yeah, they just grow crops, right? But no, like, and especially too with the development of like Lithium Valley and stuff like that. That's another reason like why this area is like really like rich of history, and then also too like the indigenous people who have lived here, the Cahuilla, the Kumeyaay, the Quechan, like there's a lot of rich local history there too that hasn't like really made. So anyways, going back to your question, like, I think that right now the Imperial Valley and Mexicali is like in a really, again, Mexicali is like a whole other like, there's so much important history in Mexicali that's not really like talked about. But I think that right now with, technology and stuff like that, podcasts, Twitch and all that stuff. There's a really unique opportunity to like make these histories more prevalent in local dialogues.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Have you gone to the? I mean, I'm sure you've gone there, but have you been recently to the Pioneers?
Yeah, I've been. Well, actually, no, I haven't been recently to Pioneers. Yeah.
Because they have a new what do they call the person that's in charge of the?
The executive director. I listened to your episode.
Oh, okay, yeah. I feel that it should probably would be glad to talk to you since you have a lot of information about the Imperial Valley, Calexico, and Mexicali. That I think you guys would have a good conversation.
Yeah. That's the next step.
Yeah. But can you tell us where people can if they want to reach out to you, how can they get a hold of you in case they want to talk about these places that you're doing research on?
Yeah, so I have a website. I think it's Jonathan Angulo.com. You can go in there. I have my email address. I have like my LinkedIn, my Twitter/X on there. I have my Blue Sky link in there, so you can reach me through there. I have my email address. You can reach me at my SDSU one, which is jangulo3@sdsu.edu. Or you can reach me at my SMU one, jangulo@smu.edu. But yeah, you can just go to my website and just
okay. Well, and I'll can you make sure you send me those? That way, I can put them in the description of this episode. That way, people can can go in there and click on it and reach out to you. Because I mean, I'm really interested into whatever you find out. Even the conversation today was like, wow, I've learned a couple of things that I didn't know about Calexico. So yeah, it's gonna be really interesting. Have you read the book that they wrote about Calexico?
I haven't purchased it yet.
Okay.
Do you have a copy of it?
I have a copy. You can probably stop by my house and get it if you want. I'll let you borrow it.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I haven't read it either. But I think they did a lot of research because it goes back, way back. Because I think they were gonna try and do it in parts, like from when Calexico started to I guess now. Mm-hmm. But the first part is back in the days. But yeah, I can let you borrow it if you can find it right now.
Okay.
But
it's gonna be a rare book.
You think so?
Yeah, because I tried getting it through the interlibrary loan system through the university, and they were like, "Yeah, we can't get it for you because there's not enough print copies out."
Oh, okay.
So what's it called? So hold on to it. Yeah.
But yeah, definitely if you guys want to reach out to him, make sure you do. I'll make sure to put all the links in the description of today's show. I want to thank you for reaching out first of all, because otherwise I would have learned about Calexico and even maybe not even know that you're doing all this research, because sometimes we're too busy that we really don't. Like I said, I've been here 30-some years and I've some of the things that you're researching I never thought about looking into. But yeah, thank you once again. Thank you guys for listening or watching, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.